The planets have aligned, and after a 2-week hiatus, the prophecy has once again come true. That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink podcast. We're back with me, your host, Uncle Paddy, joined as always every week by twin brother and spare parts bin, Andy, the asshole.
Woo!
And one is the loneliest number that you'll ever know, signifying that we are one man down in the form of Stevie Tel Aviv.
And shall be one man down for the
sadly
foreseeable future.
Quite a few weeks to come, who is off pursuing his side hustle, third career, fifth career, 10th career, can't count them up.
As the world's most prolific tour guide.
Stephen,
wherever you are, whatever busload of geriatrics you're shepherding to some far-flung corner of the UK, we send
Or
you
Ireland.
love and, more practically, a blister pack of incontinence Snickers. Love you, mate.
Yeah, we love you, pal, and we miss you. And Stevie will be sadly gone for a few more weeks to come.
So a couple of weeks, man. I'm kind of... I can forget what to do.
So it's just going to be me and you for the summer, it looks like. Anyhow, there is a packed docket, so let's rocket the docket, as Jake would say.
Rocket the docket.
This week, we'll be discussing the Tesla RoboTaxi launch in Austin only 24 hours ago. We've also been to the mountaintop and observed the end state of AI.
Yes, we
have. And it all ends up in one place, N8N. Woo. And we'll also be discussing Grok 3.5's rewrite of the public internet. And this one's quite exciting. We stumbled into it last week in a very uncontrolled fashion, but we're going to hit the reset button on it, and we're going to start a new series covering the practical implementation of AI inside your business. And we have loads to say about that. So just like we did the entrepreneurial journey, and that took us over something like 6 or 7 weeks, we'll probably spend the rest of the summer unpacking
what is actually involved in the practical implementation of AI in your goddamn business.
So let's start with the RoboTaxi. I'll set the scene, and then Andy, you can provide us some commentary on it. So RoboTaxi launched around about 6 p.m. last night UK, I think midday Central Time. And so this is the culmination of a 10-year promise of fully autonomous Teslas on the road, no drivers, jump in the back, take you to your destination. From all I could observe last night, and then when I woke up and checked the news this morning, I don't think it could have went much better.
No.
I did see a really interesting screenshot from the control tower where they were sort of orchestrating the whole thing, that 13 minutes into the launch of RoboTaxi, they'd already driven 115 rides, done nearly 500 miles.
With a very small fleet of cars.
About 35 cars on the road, and limited to a small geofence within
relatively
the Austin
small area of Austin. Yeah.
And I'd fully expected to wake up this morning to see some sort of hyperbolic news story that, you know, a Tesla had crashed,
or ran a red light,
or somebody had like exploded through the window as paparazzi probably threw themselves in front of the car trying to sabotage it. But actually, it seemed to go great.
Which is almost unbelievable considering the amount of people that had it in for Tesla. I mean, you have to imagine that every journalist and his granny was tailing these things all about Austin all day, just waiting in the wings to capture it, running a red light or running up the wrong side of the road, or God forbid crashing, and it never happened.
No.
They were worried about saboteurs as well, by the way.
Totally. I mean, and this is why I wish people could just put fucking politics to the side sometimes. Like, forget all that shit. This is an incredible technical achievement. Only ever done by Waymo in the past. And for Waymo to do it, they needed 24 cameras and an entire laser sensor suite of LiDAR on the roof.
Yeah.
Bringing the cost of that vehicle in somewhere in the
200 grand mark.
200 grand mark. I thought it was 150 to 200K. And so Tesla have been able to recreate the same result with 8 cameras and a computer.
And this was always the promise. So why is that so important? Well, let's set the stage first. So we had about 30 plus cars delivering about 1,000 rides in the first 24 hours. in a relatively small area in Austin with 100% success rate. I think I saw one wee anecdote where it was a bit herky-jerky between lanes, but ultimately no interventions and no accidents.
No.
So that's a big hell yeah. And I think, you know, as you say, 8-9 years.
Probably just clarify for people, there is a safety driver sitting in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
From all the videos I saw, and I saw dozens and dozens last night, he just sits there. He's not allowed to answer questions. It's not exactly clear what he could actually fucking do either, because he doesn't seem to have access to any controls either.
Ghosting the guy so badly in the back seat of his pepper.
But he was just sitting there in the passenger seat, chilling. It would appear no ability to do anything if the car got into a difficult situation.
So let's talk a wee bit about the two different approaches that we have to self-driving at the moment. So what we had is the legacy approach, which is Waymo, which is an incredibly complicated and takes loads of time to implement mapping of a city before they launch. So there's ordnance survey maps,
HD maps
that have a road camber and every stop sign in the city and stuff. And so there's as well as the stuff that's on the incredibly expensive car, the LiDAR suite and all the radars, as well as the cameras. There's an incredible faff in order for Waymo to be able to launch in any city. And while they've delivered fantastically safe rides, it's not
at scale, to be fair to them.
But it's not a system that scales particularly easily.
Yeah.
So if the idea is to scale this to millions of rides now before the end of the year, with the Waymo approach, you wouldn't have been able to do this. But what Tesla bet on is that with 8 cameras plus a neural net, equaling controls out, they could surpass the competence of the average human driver, and then from here just accelerate out onto the distance. So 8 years too late.
Yeah.
8 years later, we're finally here, and it looks like we've got a car that drives better than the average human driver. It's probably something approaching an advanced driver at this point, and it's just going to accelerate from here. This will be as bad as the driver ever is from this moment onwards.
And I hope all the haters and all the naysayers have the good graces to eat a bit of humble pie here. There's it was so fucking clear to a lot of us that we're only bargaining about the timeline here. It was never about would this become a reality. It was just what's the timeline. And there's so many people, because it never happened when he said it would happen, wrote the whole idea off. And
there was people 8 weeks ago saying they'll never launch in Austin in June. He's been saying that for 8 years. They'll be lucky if they launch next year.
Exactly.
So all the guys are eating humble pie. Couple of big things to really touch on now. So we know the difference between the approaches in terms of the safety profile of the approaches and the complexity of getting cars on the road with each approach. One of the things that's very poorly understood is the cost differentiation between the two approaches.
So we're going to run some numbers. So reach behind you there. There's a calculator within arm's length and pass it to me. Okay. Because this is the thing that blows my mind. I don't think people realise
the business model that's happened here. Yeah, 100%.
And so everybody who's been whinging about Tesla's $1 trillion valuation, honestly, that might look really cheap in the very near future, because the gross margin on this RoboTaxi model, if the numbers that we've done earlier in the day are even remotely accurate, even in the ballpark, standard deviation by a factor of 2, the business model is still incredible. So good, how could you justify selling a Tesla to anybody other than adding it to the RoboTaxi fleet?
Because you're not going to be selling at a 17% margin, something that can potentially create you thousands of percent margin. So before you go into the actual numbers of the business model, I think a good starting place is how much is the current RoboTaxi versus the Waymo car, and then with Cybercab being the ultimate evolution of that. So let's start with those 3 price points respectively. So we know that a Waymo car is approximately $200,000.
Okay.
How much is a Tesla Model Y Juniper long range?
About 50k in the UK.
It's 51,000, right? And then they reckon that the Cybercab, which is a 2-seater version, which is purpose built to be a cab and nothing else,
gets
got
built
no
for about
steering wheel, it's got no
$30,000.
pedals. They reckon the manufacturing costs of that are $28,000 to $30,000. So you've got something that's potentially 7 times cheaper than the current paradigm that's out there on the road at the moment. So let's start with that as the framing point before we now go into the numbers about what that means.
Start with the knowns, the known knowns, understanding that they can change.
Yeah.
So fares, which I'm sure is an introductory rate, I'm sure it's a made-up rate, but it was $4.20 per ride.
Because he's got an obsession with the number 42.
42.
He's fucking...
Within that geo-fenced area in Austin.
But we know that it's going to be significantly higher than that. The average fare will probably be $7, $8.
We'll try a few different numbers here, right? But it was $4.20 per ride. We know, we could see from the mission control kind of dashboard screenshot that they took that the average ride was about 13 minutes, 13 or 14 minutes. So we'll just average out some numbers here, right? And we know that right now, by the way, and this was only became clear to me earlier, right now I think they're only licensed to run from 6 a.m. to midday.
Right, okay.
But in the future, let's assume that they've got an operating life of somewhere between 14 and 16 hours a day, from 6 a.m. in the morning to maybe 10 a.m. at night, something like that. That would be a reasonable assumption. And then they'd go somewhere at night time and get cleaned and recharged, okay? So let's run some math. So at $5, let's do easy math. At $5 a ride, with each ride taking about 15 minutes, that gives you the capacity to do 4 rides an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's $20 an hour with ability to run 16 hours a day. So
that's a stupidly low price point, by the way.
Stupidly low price point of $5 per ride can make $320 a day.
Yeah.
So you lop off insurance, you lop off charging costs, you lop off. So say you've got a margin that's half that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then some depreciation for the vehicle and financing, but they'll self-finance all these things as well. So say you have a margin of about $150 a day per vehicle.
Net margin.
Which is $1,000 a week, which is $4,200 a month.
Yeah.
Okay. So you pay the vehicle back in 7 or 8 months.
Yeah.
Your entire cost of the vehicle. If the vehicle's doing 30, 40,000 miles a year, it's got a serviceable life of 5 years. That vehicle...
and by the way, this is at the lowest fare that we can possibly imagine. The fares will absolutely be higher than this.
The fares will most likely be somewhere in the region of double what we're talking about here. But even on these absurdly low numbers, that vehicle is worth to Tesla as a member of the taxi fleet $252,000
and might have cost 30 grand
cost of its life,
and might have cost 30 grand to produce.
Now, if you make a Model Y for 40 and you sell it for 52, and that's the only money you ever make off that consumer, so you've got a $12,000 margin by selling it to somebody to drive versus a $252,000 5-year return by adding it to the RoboTaxi fleet. How the fuck do you do anything other than add them to the RoboTaxi fleet?
But the answer is it will be a blended approach, and it will dramatically increase Tesla's overall profitability on the car business fantastically. Yeah. And it will give them control over their sales quota. So if they say to the market, we're going to sell 500,000 cars this quarter and they only sell 400,000 cars to people like me and you, well, they can just produce the other 100,000 and put them into the RoboTaxi fleet. Yeah. So it gives them complete control almost over their sales figures moving forward for the foreseeable as well.
And again, just to double click on the point, we don't believe for a second that number of 420 is true. We think it's going to be double that, which means it's about $500,000 over 5 years, that same 40 or 50 grand that same 30 grand vehicle returns.
So let's look at some of the second and third.
So for anybody questioning, why the fuck did Tesla have this crazy $1 trillion valuation? Now you understand!
Because they're about to invent the most profitable business model on planet Earth.
Yeah. I just
but you invest 30 grand and get £500,000 in return over the course of 5 years.
Does anybody realise what happened here? Everybody knew Waymo was a proof of concept that could not scale to a global market. They've got 500, 600 cars on the road in total. Adding them is a couple of $100,000 they're buying from third-party manufacturers. There's a whole ton of... These robo-taxis that are running about Austin right now, they're the same freaking cars that you can go and buy from the dealership, completely unmodified. Yeah. Totally unmodified.
And Elon's been telling us for years this autonomy is the biggest value unlock maybe in history for any company.
I don't think what people understand is how many of these things could come on stream
Millions
so quickly.
and millions and millions.
Okay, well let's look at us. Let's take the
Let's look
over
at the
under
end
on a
of this
6
year.
to 12 month
Yeah.
period of time. So
we're halfway through the year.
I've no doubt that, like you said, self-driving is as dumb as it's ever going to be today, and it already successfully did over 1,000 rides yesterday.
Yeah.
Without causing anybody any problems or any safety incidents.
So by the end of the year,
it's way more safe than it is right now and way more predictable, which allows more cars to come online. So if there's 30 cars online today...
And the scaling up period is every incremental scaling up period is in weeks, not in months or years. So they go from 30 cars to 300 cars to 3,000 cars to 30,000 cars to 100,000 cars. You could conceivably be at 1 million plus rides by the end of the year.
Nah, no way.
No?
Not a chance.
When they've done 1,000 today with 30 cars.
Oh, rides. I thought you meant 1 million cars.
No, rides.
Yeah, absolutely. You could be well over 1 million rides by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just going to go parabolic, innit? It's not even like... And here's another angle on this, which has just came to me there. What does this do for demand for Teslas globally, just from consumers and individuals? So you're a young guy, you're hardworking, but you can't quite afford the Tesla. You can self-fund the Tesla by putting it into the fleet for 5 rides a day, which will cover the leasing costs and the insurance costs of your Tesla, and then you get the use of it the rest of the time. There'll be self-funded purchases.
There'll be for sure people who do that. That's not as glamorous as it seems to be. It's like renting any asset, right? People don't look up after assets that get rented. People puke up in them. People bring fucking dogs into them. People do all sorts of things you don't want them doing to rented assets.
People will do that at scale. People that...
Aye. So I think nobody's going to put their Tesla into the Tesla fleet that doesn't have to put it into the Tesla fleet. But I accept your point, which is maybe for some people, the only way to Tesla ownership is to offload it into the fleet for certain parts of the day.
And
if you're at work between 9 and 6, why not have the car go and make some money for you? So that
stick it into the fleet for 2 hours, do 5 or 6 rides, and if you do that every day...
Why would you stick it in for 2 hours? Why would you not stick it in for the whole working day?
No, because you
and
maybe
have it meet you outside work at 6
because you
PM
might
at
want to
night?
keep the mileage down. You might have taken a lease out that's got a 20,000 mile cap on it.
Yeah.
Who knows? But the bottom line is
you have the flexibility.
You have the flexibility to do that, and you probably only need to do 5 or 6 rides a day to cover the leasing cost of the car plus your insurance. So you then get the utility of it beyond that for free. And what it does is it just brings fantastically more buyers, because there's no another car that can self-fund itself, is there? Really?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
So again, does everybody realise, can we all just take a minute, sit down, scream into a pillow and realise what just happened here? The world just fucking changed.
Completely and utterly
We're
forever.
only bargaining now about how many cars can come online and what. The driving is over. It's done. We're just bargaining about the timeline. Driving as a profession is done. We're only bargaining about the timeline. So this is a fundamentally, foundationally cracked problem. AI can drive and drives really well. All we're dialing in now is the number of 9s of reliability that you can apply to driving.
And it will just gallop through the decimal points towards perfection between now and pick any particular point in the future.
So like a lot of Elon stuff, he's super late on this one, but he wasn't wrong, and he's here.
He wasn't wrong. His approach, because he's such a clear thinker and such a genius, you always got to bet that he's picked the right approach. And it might be a longer and more arduous approach than the guys that have got proof of concept and have been operating rides for years. But this is clear that this is the one that scales, and they're going to overtake Waymo like they're standing still in the next couple of years.
Yeah, totally agree.
Woo! Come on,
there you
Elon.
go, folks. The world just changed. We are living in incredible... I don't know. Sometimes I want to run out into the street and I see people like taking their fucking trash cans out, and I want to grab them and go, do you realise what's happening? You're running about emptying trash. The world's fucking changing in front of your eyes. Like, I do feel like the guy who, what was that movie, Don't Look Up? You're the only guy that can see the asteroid coming.
It's great to have Elon back executing in business again and out of all that political shit, because it's clear this is where he does his best work.
Absolutely. All right, RoboTaxi in the can.
In the can.
And by the way, can I just say one thing? For sure, as there has been with Waymo and has there been with other autonomous driving system, for sure you'll see a bump or an accident at some point in the future. Perfection is not a standard that we are trying to hold any of this stuff to.
No.
What it just needs to be is way better than a human. But, you know, the road is then full of other humans and they're all imperfect as well. So, aye, for sure, in the next couple of weeks, in the next couple of months, you're going to see some fucking absurd headline that a Tesla
Cybercab or RoboTaxi,
bumped into a lamppost at 20 mile an hour and the airbag went off. Yes, that will happen. And the answer is, so what? Who gives a fuck? Keep calm and carry on.
Because human drivers, we already have the statistics for accidents and, you know, accidents per million miles for human drivers. And as long as the Tesla is fantastically better than that and getting better every day, then that should be the standard that you hold it to.
Yeah,
That's what the regulators are interested in.
And you could take that silly point of view and you could apply it to AI in general. The amount of people I know that had one bad experience with AI, usually because their prompt sucked, and then wrote the whole...
shit, doesn't want that AI.
Wrote the whole thing off.
Yeah.
It's crap. I tried to use it. Doesn't work. Or really, what we try? I tried to do this. Show me your prompt. All right. Well, straight away, I can tell you why it never worked. Yeah. So this whole, you know, autonomy and all these things have got to be held to perfection. I'm one of these kind of weirdos who's got the Flight Radar 24 app. I've got it set up to alert me every time an aeroplane squawks a specific code that would be an emergency code. Do you know I get an alert every day?
I think you've got about 6 of them while we've been recording this fucking podcast.
Autonomous systems have been running aeroplanes for 30 years, and guess what? They're still not perfect.
Yeah.
They have problems, but the problems with the wild and very recent exception of the terrible Air India accident, to the largest extent, the safety profile's so big, we accept that tiny chance of catastrophic failure.
And you would only understand what a difference that was if the pilot was hand flying the aircraft all the way to fucking Costa del Sol.
But every day, planes squawk the emergency code because they're in some problem, or a system's failed, or a component's failed, or an engine's failed. Failure's happening all the time in every mode of transport in the world. Therefore, self-driving should not be held to a completely different standard of perfection. Standard. There will be failure. It just needs to be an acceptable level of failure.
That's fantastically better than the status quo.
Okay.
Ooh,
RoboTaxi. Right. Next story, Grok 3.5. So again, we're a bit Elon heavy this week, but we'll soldier on.
Keep trucking on.
So what's becoming very clear is that in order to train these models, you basically have to hoover up all the publicly available information on the internet. And it turns out a lot of the information on the internet is just slop. It's just
garbage or incomplete.
Yeah, it's incomplete, it's garbage, or it's incorrect. And so you hoover up all the training data, you pre-train on that data, and then in post-training, you try and straighten out a lot
through
of the
reinforcement learning. And
post-training, reinforcement learning, you try and smooth out all the inaccuracies using a whole bunch of exception handling. Once again, Elon has a different point of view on this.
Yeah.
And by the way, even if we continued on that path, we can still get phenomenal gains because that's working, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these models are very predictable now and you can rely on them. But Elon takes a physics first principles view of the whole thing and he goes back to the drawing board and goes, why are we accepting that the information has to be inaccurate, incomplete, and slop?
Yeah.
So why can we not use AI to go and rewrite the entire corpus of human information, correcting the errors, fixing the slop, filling in the incomplete parts
before we train the model
to create a much better set of training data to then pre-train the next version of Grok.
Yeah.
Absolutely ingenious idea.
But with the underpinnings behind it, that he believes that the maximally truth-seeking AI will be the safest AI in the end, because the more you build in bias, even if you're just trying to spare people's feelings and stuff, the more chance you've got of something going wrong. Yeah. So, and what a great competitive weapon as well, right? So if you've got the best chips, if you've got the most chips, and you've got the most advanced models, well, another big advantage to have is having the cleanest, most truthful version of the publicly available internet that's all been cleaned up before you train on it.
Yeah.
And it'll make the models faster, and it'll make it return better quality output, because you're not having to handle all those exceptions as they're coming in.
And exception handling, there's only so far you can go. When you've got enough exceptions, it just becomes a freaking mess. And even you can barely figure out what you actually, all the exceptions you wrote and what exceptions clash with other exceptions. So eventually you do have to go back to the underlying source of data and clean up the data. And listen, don't get me wrong, there is some cleaning up of the data in all these model makers as it's being consumed and processed. But this is like fundamentally rewriting the entire corpus of all human-generated data. Now, I'll tell you what the insight is here for me, because we don't like to blurt facts out in isolation. We're always trying to get to what's the insight, what's the societal level thing, what's the thing that's coming down the line as a result of that. For me, what you started to see there is in AI, you're now starting to see flywheels developing everywhere. So you have AI that's pre-trained on data that generates a model that's good enough to then rewrite all the training data to create a better model that's then good enough to even do a better job of rewriting the training data. And then you get this flywheel starting to turn.
Crazy, fast improvement. Yeah.
Let's go back to Tesla. You then get 100, a million real miles driven, fed into a computer that helps build a model that can make sense of those million miles driven, that helps build a synthetic driver. And then we figured out how to create synthetic data.
Yeah.
And now we can create 100 billion synthetic miles for that driver to then drive.
From the corpus of million mile data.
To create a better driver. And then there's a flywheel starting to develop there. So the AI creates the better driver. The better driver creates inputs for the model to create a better model, to create a better driver. And all of a sudden you've got a flywheel going there. So AI is getting to that point now where you're starting to see flywheels develop everywhere.
Yeah.
The code generation models. Now that Claude is basically the de facto code gen model for the planet Earth, all the inputs, all the developers using Cursor and Claude Code and all the input going back to the model makers is help making the model better to make a better Claude Code, to get more users, to provide more input, to make a better Claude Code. And then there's a flywheel starting to develop there. There's flywheels starting to develop in the medical field. So everywhere now we're getting to this exponential part of the curve where we're going parabolic.
Yeah. AGI is within sight. Yeah.
Flywheels are now developing everywhere. And by the way, this is a completely aside, but I wanted to take the victory lap. Did you see this week that Apple is in talks to acquire Perplexity?
No.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Who predicted that?
Yeah, Uncle
On
Paddy.
the Roundtable Rethink podcast about 4 weeks ago.
Wow.
It was obvious. They absolutely had to. Why did I bring that up? Because watching these flywheels develop, watching how the summer's panned out in a way, I mean, talk about predictions we've got right. Here's a prediction I never got right. I thought the summer would be quiet.
Yeah.
I thought the summer would be quiet while they built out the infrastructure.
And then there would be a bunch of releases
wave.
towards the end of the year.
Summer's been non-stop.
I know.
Absolutely non-stop. Yep. And there's no let up in sight. And so think about between now and the end of the year, you're going to have at least 2 revs of all the main model makers. Yep. You're going to have Gemini 2.7 Pro or 3.0 Pro.
Grok 3.5, ChatGPT 5.
Claude 4.5 and 5.0, ChatGPT 5 and 5.5. Yeah. And it all ends up in agents. And that is a nice transition onto our final topic tonight.
We went to the top of Mount Sinai. Yeah. We stared out into the future. We came back down with the tablets of stone. Yeah.
So we spend an extraordinary amount of time geeking out on this stuff. Yeah. Like it's actually overwhelming sometimes. I probably consume 20 to 25 hours a week of AI podcasts. Yeah. The time I'm not doing that, I'm actually spending it on AI tool sets, learning tool sets, discovering new tools, evaluating new tools, and then constantly talking to businesses and companies about how they're adopting and implementing AI. And so if you'd went back 12 months ago, AI was a great proof of concept. It was a great demo, but it was very freaking hard to build production grade capabilities. Yeah. I would say since the start of the year, since you got Gemini 2.5 Pro, since you got Claude 3.7 Sonnet really was the start of it, you could really start to make these agentic workflows very, very predictable and consistent. And then we learned more and we got more sophisticated about how we prompted AIs. And so we are very much at the point now where for the last 2 years, Everybody's gone to conferences where they're wheeling out fucking PhDs talking about how models get trained in transformers. Like that's got any relevance to any normal business owner.
100%.
The truth is there's going to be about half a dozen companies in the world that train models, and everybody else is just going to consume them and use them. So we don't need to know how models get made, right? They just get made, and they're getting better all the time at an unbelievable speed. But what we are going to be is we're all going to be consumers of models. And so we're going to have to understand, what are the models? What do they do well? What do they suck at? What tool do you use for the right job? And so people are very much interested now, and we are inundated with inbound at the Roundtable Rethink about how do you actually start making this stuff real inside your company. And by the way, not just here's a cool demo, but that's actually got real business value that shows up somewhere down the line on an income statement, right? Where you can actually capture a metric beforehand, implement some kind of AI process or automation, and then 6 months down the line, see that metric changed as a result of that. So we're finally at that point. Everybody is now scrambling to do that. So what we thought, instead of taking all this inbound one by one and getting back to people individually, again, we're trying to work out how do we scale the advice.
Yeah.
And so just like we did the entrepreneurial breakdown, we're now going to do the practical guide to AI adoption inside a company. And so let's start at step one. So this week, we're actually going to cover some foundational stuff. And one of the most foundational things, and it sounds obvious when I say it, but you would be amazed at the amount of companies that don't do it, is first and foremost, you have to remove all the barriers to experimentation and tool use inside the company. Yeah. Okay, there's so many companies who are overly and unnecessarily concerned about security risks. Yeah. Because they read a white paper somewhere. And by the way, depending on if you're connecting this to real company data, building data lakes, taking data from ERP systems, building data, sure, there's legitimate concerns there, but they're largely grossly overestimated. Yeah.
2 anecdotes before you go any further. Number one, I spoke to a family member this week who works for the local authority. Every single local authority staff member is precluded from using ChatGPT.
Mind-blowing.
It is hidden for everybody behind a firewall. Yeah. Nobody is allowed to use it.
It's like we're deliberately making our fucking public sector employees completely inefficient.
Yeah, because they are in blind terror that you actually get your work finished by 1 o'clock in the afternoon instead of a minute to 5, and they don't know what to do with you for that last 4 hours of the day. So they would much rather you did your work in the most inefficient way possible so that they can account for your time till 5 o'clock every day. And then the other anecdote was, I believe you were speaking to somebody in a private company who only allowed certain level of management to access the agentic tool. Well, not even the agentic tools, just things like ChatGPT. Yeah. And that the average staff member was not allowed to use it.
Yeah, correct.
Why?
Exactly. And so that doesn't work either, right? Because I assume that most of the company are now managers. Therefore, if you're trying to adopt a culture of AI first, AI led, be an AI first, AI led business, how can you do that when the overwhelming majority of the employees aren't using AI? So that's the first thing. You've got to remove the barriers to do that. This is it's become clearer to me every single day that the true value to the leadership role when it comes to being the champion inside a business for AI is not strategy, because the truth is there are tools, and there's dozens of them, that could spit out the AI strategy for any business in the world in 15 minutes. So there is no value to trying to articulate the strategy, right? That's completely commoditized. The true value in the leadership role is having a intermediate level understanding of a couple of dozen really important, prominent AI tools that solve real problems across the business, and understanding the pros and cons of each, when to use one versus another. And then when you get into the tools, most importantly, make sure that they don't absolutely consume or your credits because of misuse of the tool, because it's very easy to rack up. It's a bit like the old Google AdWords thing, right? Yeah. If you don't know how to set up a Google AdWords campaign, it'll just eat all your money and deliver no value. Yeah. If you don't know when to use models or what model to use under what circumstances, it'll just send you a massive bill for tokens for no value.
Knowing what model to use for what task is so important moving forward.
So opening up experimentation inside the business is critical. And here's the other thing that's really hard for companies to get their head around. There are literally about a dozen tools that's required across the business in order to be effective. Because where people go from, right, nobody gets AI, they open ChatGPT up to a handful of employees and they go, right, we've done AI. It's like, ChatGPT is one of about a dozen different AI tools that you're going to need to solve different problems across the business. You're going to need ChatGPT. You're going to need Perplexity. You're going to need Gemini 2.5 Pro. You're going to need Claude for code gen. You're going to need NAN for workflow automation. You're going to need fucking Gumloop. And on it goes. So again, there needs to be a budget for that as well. Now, if you're in a company with 500 people, I'm not saying that you have to kit everybody out with 14 or 15 very expensive subscriptions.
No.
But what you are going to have to do is find those key sort of tiger teams inside each part of the company that are licensed to go and experiment, because this is a learn by doing skill set. You cannot freaking learn this as a thought experiment, as a spreadsheet experiment, as a PowerPoint experiment, or in the classroom. You have to be hands-on with the tools, on the keyboard, over-the-shoulder sessions, lunch and learns. You've got to be on the keyboard with the tools in order to learn this stuff.
And the reason you need to release it to the staff is that all the automation ideas, all the innovation is actually going to come from the people in the departments that are at the coalface and have been ensconced in that department for the last 5 years and know it inside it and back to front. You cannot depend on your general high-level knowledge of the departments. You've got to release it to the people in there. They will conceive of the best use cases within their own departments.
So that's step one. Take down the barriers for tool usage and experimentation. There's got to be a culture of encouragement for that. You've got to bring it into their remuneration conversation. You've got to bring it into their performance reviews. You've got to build a culture where experimentation is encouraged. And there has to be a budget for it. That's foundational. Then you've got to get the key tools in the key hands of key people. Then once you've got the tools, and we're going to save this one for next week because I've probably covered enough this week, then we get into prompting. Okay? And this is long. All this is long before you go and identify the use cases and all the things you want to automate. That's where everything ends up. But there's very important steps that we have to go through before we get there.
And all you know about prompting for sure is that almost everybody is doing it wrong right now.
100%. And you've got to create a positive vision for this inside the company. It can't be, guys, we really need you to focus on this so we can fire you at the end of it. That can't be the message, right? You've got to create a positive vision, and ideally it would be fucking real as well. So it's guys, this is about doing way more with the same resources. How can every person become more productive, more efficient inside the business so that we can take it to our competitors and do more without having to add resources to the business?
So as we finish this, as we kind of starting to work towards wrapping up this particular podcast, you started this segment by saying we've been to the mountaintop, we've looked into the future and the end state of AI, and then we touched on that from what we can see at the moment, the end state seems to lie in agentic work and in particular automations. Do we want to just touch a wee bit on automation before we finish up?
Are we not jump into like week 5?
Right, okay, we'll keep our powder dry.
I wanted to just build it up as well. Yeah. You're right. I mean, that's where everything ends up, right? When you get to the bottom of the helter-skelter, eventually you end up with a bunch of workloads you want to automate that people used to do. But let's build up to that point. So it's about psychological safety. Have you created enough psychological safety within the business where people can feel like they can truly participate on this, become proficient in it without participating in their own execution? And have the really real conversation. The thing that's on everybody's mind is, if I do this, am I going to get fired in 6 months' time? You've got to address that head on, because believe me, when you take all the leadership and the management out of the way, that is what's on everybody's mind. All right, there you go. Week 1.
Did we do under an hour?
of the Practical Guide to AI Adoption series. We're actually 40 minutes, which is great.
That is unbelievable.
Unheard of.
I think that's one of the shorter ones.
But that's
that we've
cool.
done.
I mean, 40
That's
minutes
about the
feels
right-
like it's the
about
right
the
time this
time.
week.
We covered,
Okay.
we covered a bit of ground there as well.
No, a lot going on. We won't run out of stuff to talk about anytime soon. We're back in the saddle.
And in the absence of Stevie Tel Aviv, I have to remind you to like and share the podcast. Listen to it. Give us a review. Listen to it wherever you listen to your podcasts. And remember, if you don't have a Apple subscription or a Spotify subscription, you can get us on YouTube or our own website, www.roundtablerethink.com.
There you have it, folks. Episode 20 in the can. All right, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.